Mr. Speaker, I rise today to provide a summary of my recent international engagements, especially the 4 nations that I visited in September, from September 21st to October 5 as a head of government. Those were visits were made in the interest of our country, and I, as part of my duty, to inform this Parliament for our country to take note of the visit and the meetings that were held in those visits. Throughout the visits, I was accompanied by the Honorable Justin Chasenko, Minister for Foreign Affairs, and along with other senior policy officers of the Department of Prime Minister and NEC, especially in the visit to United Nations at New York and the bilaterals with the USA that was held in Washington, D.C. Mr. Speaker, also accompanying me were some members of this Parliament to give them exposure and to know what is happening, so that in their own political career they will be equipped to work not just for the districts or provinces but also for our country. Accompanying me were the Honorable Michael Marum, Governor of East New Britain Province, the Honorable Daniel Tindipu, Member for Komahulia, and the Honorable Benjamin Mool, Member for North Wagi, and the Honorable Kashmir Ayer, Member for Koilala. The Honorable Richard Maru, our Minister for International Trade and Investment, and the Honorable Governor Baird and the Governor of East Sepik, and also His Excellency Mr. Sam Abel, Papua New Guinea's Ambassador to Japan, joined me at the Tokyo sector of the state funeral of Japan's former Prime Minister, the late Shinzo Abe. Mr. Deputy Speaker, my successful visit to the 4 nations commenced with my attendance of the official funeral ceremony of our late Queen Elizabeth II in London, where I also witnessed the ascension of His Royal Highness King Charles III to the throne. I also call on His Royal Highness the King and the new United Kingdom Prime Minister, then Prime Minister rather, the Right Honourable Elizabeth Truss, immediately following the official funeral service or funeral ceremony. Discussions with the King, Mr. Speaker, will focus on forest conservation and Papua New Guinea's continuous linkage to monarchy and the Commonwealth of Nations. In our discussions also, I reaffirmed our commitment to the Commonwealth in this instance. In my meeting also, Mr. Speaker, with Prime Minister Truss, I congratulated her then on her appointment and committed our country to work closely with the British government to strengthen ties in the areas of military and the public service exchanges, the flexible visa arrangements to allow Papua New Guinean citizens ease of travel to the UK. Mr. Speaker, whilst in London also I met the Chief Executive Officer of the SWAI Group of Companies, where we discussed SWAI's business portfolio in Papua New Guinea. Mr. Speaker, for record, this company has been operating in Papua New Guinea since the early 1900s. We spoke in detail about expanding those ties and our government's strong intention to facilitate trade and investment, especially with our focus on diversifying to our downstream centered businesses in our country. Following the London sector, I proceeded to New York, where I attended the 77th United Nations General Assembly and delivered our country's statement. Mr. Speaker, I delivered our country's statement at the UN Plenary Hall on the 22nd of September. I spoke about forest conservation, climate change, Papua New Guinea's ability to shift to industrialization, investing in downstream processing from our natural resources, whilst building greater levels of value added utilizing our vast renewable and non-renewable resources. Mr. Speaker, my introductory remarks to UN 77th General Assembly, I acknowledge the theme that the General Assembly was premised on, especially on peace, prosperity, and sustainability through multilateralism amid the COVID-19 pandemic. I spoke in congruent and complement this this team of United Nations 77th General Assembly. I also spoke to on the heightened climate change threat and increasing socio-economic development challenges that the globe continues to face. I emphasized that the time for talking or rhetoric, especially from the great global industrialized nations, is over. They must put their money where their mouth is, and more action was needed, especially on transformative and concerted global actions that is needed to take the climate change issues head-on, especially the mitigation issues. In my address, I supported the Secretary General's narrative of our common agenda to progress and better understand how we can effectively address issues to deliver on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are the global prerequisites to improve our livelihoods of our people here and elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, I note that Papua New Guinea has made some progress with the Human Development Indexes. This must be documented so that we can continue to measure and assess our own progress and to dispel myths and to actually post what we are doing for our nation. Mr. Speaker, I spoke about our initiatives to improve governance and education for all. I outlined our policies to decentralize health services and improve law and order. I talked about Connect Papua New Guinea and our drive to develop high-quality economic infrastructure such as wharves, roads, airports, to enable economic growth and market access for every Papua New Guinean and our producers. I also outlined our industrialization agenda as we approach our 50th anniversary of independence and beyond, including our desire to become net exporter of both renewable and non-renewable resources through downstream processing. Mr. Speaker, the agricultural sector must be harnessed, particularly at the rural level, through price and freight subsidies and necessary support. We have embarked on this since we started government, and I indicate to the UN that this will be progressed because therein lies our potential to unbundle support to mass of our people, the 60, 70, 80% of Papua New Guineans who are still locked in the rural enclaves. This will empower rural families to sustain their livelihood as a revenue source and contribute to growing our rural economies. I stress that Papua New Guinea is working towards becoming a major supplier of organic primary and fisheries producers to global markets and our nearest neighbor, especially in the Asian marketplace. I also outlined my strong belief that decentralizing government services and functions in the provinces and districts will greatly complement our efforts to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. Speaker, I also used this occasion to call for greater foreign direct investments and economic partnership with many of our bilateral and multilateral partners. These are critical as we seek to progress our development agenda and the creation of special economic zones to support small and medium enterprises and spur our economic growth. I noted that for Papua New Guinea, I informed them that we aim as a country to be a 200 billion kina economy by 2030. Our target, I believe, given the strong economic policies of our government and our focus on diversifying our economic focus, we will achieve that by 2030. On climate change, I emphasize the need for collective action to enable resilience, adaptation, and mitigation through measures that support land preservation and reclamation. Mr. Speaker, I informed the General Assembly that Papua New Guinea is one of the few remaining countries with a pristine tropical rainforest and a major carbon sink, totaling over 70 metric tons of United Nations verified sovereign credit plus. I note our intention to bring these credits into the market by the end of this year. Doing so, we will provide significant economic benefit for our nation, whilst ensuring that we retain the critical ecological resources. Mr. Speaker, on the margins of UN Assembly, I met with the Prime Ministers of Israel and Norway. With the Prime Minister of Norway, I informed that Norway has one of the world's best sovereign wealth fund, and we discussed the possibility of also undertaking to replicate in our own sovereign wealth fund a structure similar to the Norwegian experience. And we made undertaking that in the not too distant future, Papua New Guinea sovereign wealth fund, and Norway sovereign wealth fund could have an exchange and work to understudy them and work in partnership with them. Mr. Speaker, immediately after UN, I traveled to Brisbane to attend a bilateral meeting with the Australian Prime Minister, the Honourable Albanese, on the sidelines of the annual President 13 Rugby League match between our Commonwealth and Australian Kangaroo on the 25th of September 2022. At this meeting, we reaffirmed our strong and practical commitment to the existing Papua New Guinea-Australia bilateral partnership and discussed furthering educational opportunities for our citizens in Australian secondary and tertiary institutions. We also spoke of the value that seasonal labour mobility provides to both of our nations and the need to increase quotas to provide more opportunities for our people. I stressed the importance of increasing trade and investment and partnerships to support and complement Papua New Guinea's desire to industrialize and become a net exporting economy to generate revenue to support our national budget, as well as meet our domestic consumption and food security needs. Mr. Speaker, my official engagements in Brisbane, when it was complete, I traveled with the Australian Prime Minister. We went and we attended the official state funeral service of the late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. At my attendance at this sad and solemn event, at this sad and solemn event was a mark of respect to appreciate the late Prime Minister Abe's personal and long-standing commitment to Papua New Guinea. He was a great friend of our nation, and it was appropriate that I was there to pay our final respects. And on the record, if you all would recall, our government secured for the first time almost $1 billion kina from Japan direct to our budget support. That was directly a result of the late Shinzo Abe's warmth towards our country, and we had to pay him respect. The Japanese government, through the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, or JICA, is investing high-quality infrastructure projects across our nation. These include the Port Moresby Water Sewerage Project, the Najab and Tokua Airport redevelopment projects. Najab at the moment is going full steam. Tokua will come at the back of Najab. And the Papua New Guinea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, United States electrification projects. All of these are legacy of the late Shinzo Abe. The Japanese government must also be commended for providing that $1 billion kina concession loan I alluded to in 2021 at the height of COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, I met with the Japanese Prime Minister, the Honorable Fumio Kishida, where I congratulated him on his appointment and acknowledged the increased and strengthened bilateral relationships in the areas of defense, people-to-people exchange, and continued development assistance. And Japan being a foundation PNG LNG purchaser, I acknowledge their support. I also took the opportunity whilst in Japan to meet other executives of Japanese companies who have interest to operate here in our country, especially in the LNG sector, namely Soljitz, JX Nippon, who is a partner in our LNG project right now, JX Nippon and Oil and Gas Corporation, and LNG Japan Corporation to discuss development of upcoming gas fields and for them to participate in the downstream processing of LNG and other petrochemical products. Mr. Speaker, after the state funeral service in Tokyo, I flew to Washington, D.C. and attended the first ever U.S. Pacific Island Countries Summit at the State Department building in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, 28 September 2022. The two-day summit was officially opened by Secretary of State Mr. Anthony John Blinken at the Franklin Roosevelt Room at the State's Department building. Mr. Speaker, in his opening remarks, Secretary Blinken welcomed the leaders from the Pacific Island countries and applauded their attendance and supported on issues of common interest. He noted that the inaugural summit was an avenue for Pacific and U.S. leaders to discuss business, trade and investment, climate change, security, and other emerging and existing issues and challenges that are part of the greater Blue Pacific strategy. During this meeting, Secretary Blinken announced the U.S. financial support initiative of around $4.8 billion as part of U.S. Pacific Island Country Partnership. It must be noted that these funds will be allocated based on merit, and this therefore requires that the Ministry and Department of Foreign Affairs analyze and prioritize projects that we can submit for our country over the next 10 years. Mr. Speaker, this was also my first meeting with some colleagues from the Pacific Island countries and U.S., which included Prime Minister of Fiji, Prime Minister of Solomon Islands, heads of government from Tuvalu, Samoa, Kiribati, Vanuatu, and Federated States of Micronesia and Nauru. During the meeting, leaders noted the need to meet regularly to ensure that U.S. Pacific Partnership continues to deliver practical results for the region. Mr. Speaker, on Thursday, the 29th of September, I met with the U.S. President, His Excellency Joe Biden, at the White House, where we concluded a declaration on U.S. Pacific Partnership, which aims to strengthen the U.S. Pacific Partnership through commitment to bolster Pacific regionalism by addressing and responding to threats such as climate change, natural disasters, and striving to achieve a sustainable regional economic development and growth. Furthermore, the joint U.S. Pacific Island Country Declaration will guide U.S. Pacific partnerships and promote sovereignty through mutual trust, respect, transparency, and accountability. Mr. Speaker, my participation at the above international events were very fruitful. They have allowed our nation to forge new partnerships and strengthen existing relationships to ensure practical and positively impact our own development agendas. I am content with the fact that we were able to establish effective dialogue and conversation with some of the world's leading economic powers, and through that we have secured enhanced cooperation and partnership that will complement our own domestic development agenda. In my one-on-one discussions with the heads of government from Australia, Japan, and USA, as well as in our United Nations country's statement, I was able to highlight our government and our country's development agendas, which is primarily focused in the first instance to growing a rural economy, basically assisted by an improved service delivery that we are trying to embark upon. I advocated for the realignment of development assistance towards economic infrastructure, downstream processing of vast renewable and non-renewable resources, and creation of economic zones that will increase revenue streams for our country. This is all well and good, but what remains now is to ensure that the outcomes of my discussions are absorbed into our system and processes and coordinated and implemented by all respective departments and agencies responsible. I call, Mr. Speaker, on all ministers, department heads, and agencies to take note of the matrices emanating from the NEC policy submission on the outcomes of this Four Nations tour and identify issues directly under their respective ambit and ensure that they are properly processed and properly captured in their respective annual work plans, and so convert those good meetings and networking to actual benefit for our country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I commend this paper to the House.